Beggar girl reveals secret past of millionaire's family. But comment and rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The morning sun of the sprawling metropolis reflected off the mirrored glass of the skyscrapers as the imported car stopped at a red light on the city's busiest avenue. The 30-year-old man behind the wheel adjusted his Swiss watch, his striking features and elegant posture drawing attention even inside the luxury vehicle. The fortune he had amassed over the past few years through shrewd investments in the stock market allowed him to live a life that many only dreamed of. The inheritance from his father had been multiplied with intelligence and determination. Every financial decision was calculated with mathematical precision, every investment analyzed exhaustively before moving any significant amount. His obsession with control extended to every aspect of his life, from choosing his ties to the meticulous organization of his daily schedule. The light was still red when a small figure approached the car. At first, he didn't even look. Beggars were part of the urban landscape, a social problem he preferred to ignore. His mind was focused on the important meeting that awaited him, where he would discuss expanding his business into new markets. But something about the persistence of that tiny presence bothered him. When he finally lowered his gaze, his eyes met those of a 4-year-old girl who looked barely 2 due to the extreme fragility of her thin body. Her clothes were dirty rags that barely covered her pale skin, and her disheveled hair framed a face that carried a disturbing seriousness for her age. The child tapped on the glass with a determination that surprised him. It wasn't the timid and submissive gesture he expected from a beggar. There was something almost defiant in those big, dark eyes that stared at him with a disconcerting intensity. Reluctantly, he lowered the window a few inches, prepared to give her some spare change and move on. The rush of urban life didn't allow for pauses for charity, especially when there was so much money at stake in the business he conducted. "You don't know who I am," the girl said, with a voice that, despite being childish, carried an absolute certainty that made him uncomfortable. He almost laughed at the statement. How could a street kid have any relevance in his life? His social circle consisted exclusively of successful entrepreneurs, investors, and socialites. There was no room in his world for someone like her. "Look, kid, I don't have time for—" he began to say, but was interrupted when she plunged her hand into her rags and pulled out something that made him stop breathing for a moment. It was a faded photograph, with worn edges that indicated years of careful handling. The image showed the girl herself, visibly younger, next to a middle-aged man whose features he knew better than his own. His father, the man who had built the financial empire he now commanded. The respected businessman who had shaped his personality and values since childhood. The father who had passed away 5 years ago, leaving behind a legacy of wealth and an impeccable reputation in the business world. "Impossible," he murmured, reaching out a trembling hand to take the photograph. The girl recoiled, protecting the image against her chest as if it were a treasure. "You may have all the money in the world, but you don't know the truth about how you got it." The words echoed inside the luxurious car like thunder on a clear day. His heart raced as he tried to process what was happening. How could this miserable child have a photograph of his father? What connection existed between them? The light turned green, but he couldn't move the car. The drivers behind him began to honk impatiently, but the sound seemed to come from far away. His detail-oriented and control-obsessed mind panicked in the face of something he couldn't explain or categorize. "Where did you get that picture?" he asked, his normally firm voice now laden with urgency. The girl took a step back, her eyes never leaving his face. "My mother told me to keep it. Said that one day I'd need to show it to you." "Who is your mother?" "She's not here anymore," the child replied with devastating simplicity. "But before she passed, she told me many things about your father, things you don't know." The cars behind increased the intensity of their honking, and he finally managed to engage first gear. But instead of accelerating and leaving that strange situation behind, he maneuvered the car to the side of the road, ignoring the protests of the other drivers. "Get in the car," he said impulsively. The girl hesitated, her survival instincts on the streets clearly in conflict with something deeper. "You'll listen to me. I'll listen to everything you have to say." She opened the back door and climbed into the leather seat, looking even smaller in the spacious interior of the vehicle. The contrast between her miserable appearance and the luxury that surrounded her was stark, like two completely opposite worlds meeting by chance. "My name is—" she began. "No," he interrupted, looking in the rearview mirror to see her small reflection in the back seat. "First tell me, what did your mother tell you about my father?" The girl held the photograph tighter. That he wasn't the man everyone thought he was. The orderly and controlled world he had built began to crumble at that moment, stone by stone, truth by truth, as a 4-year-old child prepared to reveal secrets that would change everything he believed he knew about his family and his fortune. The luxurious apartment in the heart of the city had never received a visitor like this. The girl sat on the edge of the Italian leather sofa, her bare feet barely touching the floor, while she watched with wide eyes the expensive paintings and sculptures that decorated the room. He poured a glass of milk and some cookies, gestures that seemed strange coming from someone accustomed to being served by staff. "Now you can tell me everything," he said, sitting in front of her in an armchair that cost more than many families earned in a year. The girl held the glass with both small hands, as if it were something precious. "My mother worked cleaning offices when she was younger. That's how she met your father." He leaned forward, his obsessive need for details demanding every piece of information. "Which offices?" "His first one. Before he got rich. Before he had all this money." She gestured vaguely around, as if the luxury was something incomprehensible. "Mom said she cleaned there every night after everyone left." His memory of his father had always been crystal clear in his mind. An upright man who built his fortune through hard work and smart decisions. The financial empire he inherited seemed to have solid foundations, built with sweat and legitimate dedication. But now, watching that fragile child, he began to question whether he really knew the whole story. "What else did your mother tell you?" The girl put the glass on the coffee table, her movements careful, as if she was afraid of breaking something valuable. That she found strange papers, documents that shouldn't have been there. And when she asked about them, what happened? Your father got angry, very angry. He told her to forget what she had seen and never talk about it again. The child's voice became lower, laden with a sadness that seemed too heavy for her 4 years. "But Mum was curious. She kept copies of the papers." His heart quickened. "What kind of documents?" "I can't read very well yet," she admitted. "But Mum showed me and explained. There were people's names, big numbers, and things about companies that didn't really exist. Ghost companies." The term echoed in his mind with a disturbing clarity. For years, he had managed various funds and investments without questioning their origins, trusting in the integrity of his father's legacy. His stock investments had always been transparent, but now he wondered about the initial resources that allowed those investments. "Where are those documents now?" The girl hesitated, biting her lower lip. "Mom hid everything before she couldn't take care of me anymore." "Do you know where she hid them?" "I know." She looked directly into his eyes. "But first, I need to tell you the rest of the story." He nodded, although every fiber of his being wanted to run after those documents immediately. His controlling personality hated having incomplete information, but he knew he needed to hear everything. After Mom asked the questions, bad things started to happen. She lost her cleaning job. No one else wanted to hire her. As if all the companies in the city knew they shouldn't give her work. That could have been coincidence. It wasn't. The certainty in the girl's voice was absolute. Because other people who worked in that office also lost their jobs. The security guard who let Mom in early one night, the receptionist who lent her the file key, they all disappeared at the same time. The luxurious room suddenly seemed smaller, more stifling. He stood up and walked to the panoramic window that offered a privileged view of the city. Down below, the constant movement of the streets continued as normal, but his perception of normalcy was being demolished word by word. "Continue," he said without turning around. Mom tried to find another job, but it was like she had been marked. She spent all her savings trying to support us. She sold everything we had of value. The girl's voice trembled slightly. "We were evicted from the apartment where we lived." He closed his eyes, beginning to understand the trajectory that had led a working woman to raise a daughter on the streets. And then, Mom got very sad, very sick. She said it was her fault, that she shouldn't have messed with those papers. But she also said she needed to protect the truth so other people wouldn't suffer like us. What other people? The girl got up from the sofa and walked to where he was, stopping next to him at the window. Despite his towering height, she looked up at him with a determination that impressed him. "The families of the men your father cheated." "My father didn't cheat anyone," he responded automatically, but his voice sounded less convincing than he expected. "Mom showed me pictures of other men who worked with your father in the beginning, men who invested money and never saw anything back, men who lost their homes, their businesses, their families." She went back to the sofa and plunged her hand into the rag she used as clothing, pulling out a small rusty can that he hadn't noticed before. Carefully, she opened the lid and revealed other photographs and folded papers. "Mom said that one day I would grow up and need to find you, that you deserved to know the truth, even if it hurt." He approached slowly, as if he were approaching a bomb that could explode at any moment. The photographs showed his father young, smiling next to other men in modest offices, shaking hands on deals that seemed genuine and promising. "Who are these men?" "Partners your father had before he got rich. Men who trusted him with their savings, their inheritances, everything they had." She pointed to a grey-haired man in one of the photos. "This is my grandfather." The world stopped for a moment. "Your grandfather?" "He was your father's partner in the first businesses. He invested the entire family inheritance in the company they were going to build together." Tears began to form in the girl's eyes. "But your father falsified documents and took everything. Grandpa lost his house, his money, even the will to live." The pieces of a sinister puzzle began to fit together in his mind. The mysterious origin of his father's initial capital, the vague explanations about the first investments, the reluctance to talk about the times before success. "This can't be true," he murmured, but his own voice betrayed his growing doubts. The girl held up one of the photographs where his father appeared smiling, his arm around the grey-haired man's shoulder. "Mom said Grandpa died, believing he had failed his family. He never knew he was betrayed." He took the photograph with trembling hands. The date on the back showed that it was taken 3 years before he was born, when his father was still practically unknown in the business world. But the smile on his father's face was the same one he had known throughout his childhood, confident, charismatic, convincing. "How many families?" he asked, although he feared the answer. Mom knew of at least 7. They all lost everything. Some never recovered. The girl closed the can carefully. "And there's more, things that happened after your father became powerful." Before he could ask anything else, the sound of the key turning in the door lock made him freeze. Only one person had a key to his apartment: his stepmother, the woman his father had married 2 years before he passed away. "Hide everything," he whispered urgently to the girl, but it was too late. The door opened, and the 40-year-old woman entered the apartment, stopping abruptly when she saw the scene before her. Her calculating eyes quickly swept over the girl, the photographs scattered on the table, and finally landed on his pale face. "How interesting," she said slowly, a cold smile forming on her lips. It seems that our past has finally decided to pay us a visit. The silence that settled in the apartment was as dense as a storm cloud. The stepmother closed the door behind her with calculated calm, her high heels echoing on the marble floor as she approached. The girl instinctively cowered on the sofa, holding the rusty can against her chest like a shield. "You didn't say you were expecting visitors today," the woman commented, taking off her leather gloves and placing her designer bag on the side table. Her eyes never stopped watching the child, like a predator studying its prey. "I didn't know I needed to communicate my activities," he replied, but his voice trembled slightly. The power dynamic in his own home had changed drastically since he inherited the fortune. Although he technically controlled the family assets, his stepmother had always demonstrated knowledge of business details that he was unaware of. "Of course you don't have to, honey." She sat elegantly in the opposite armchair, crossing her legs and staring at the girl with morbid curiosity. "But I wonder what a child like this would be doing in our home." The use of the word "our" did not go unnoticed by him. Technically, the house was his, purchased with resources from his personal inheritance. But since he had taken control of the business, she had gradually inserted herself into all the important decisions, claiming to know better the traditional family methods. "She brought some information about my father," he said, trying to maintain control of the situation. "Oh, how lovely!" The stepmother's smile widened, but didn't reach her eyes. "And what kind of information could a street kid have about my late husband?" The girl raised her chin with surprising courage. "Information about the people he hurt." The stepmother's reaction was instantaneous but controlled. Only a slight tightening of her eyes revealed that the words had struck home. Children have such fertile imaginations, don't they? Especially when they live on the streets, exposed to all sorts of made-up stories. "They're not made-up stories," the girl insisted, opening the can and taking out one of the photographs. "My mother knew the truth." When the stepmother saw the image, her composure finally faltered. For a split second, her face revealed a mixture of shock and something that looked almost relief, as if a long and anxious wait had finally come to an end. "Where did you get that?" she asked, reaching out to take the photograph. The girl recoiled, protecting the image. "I'm not giving it to you." "That wasn't a request," the stepmother said, her voice losing all of its previous false sweetness. He stood up, interposing himself between the two. "Leave her alone. If you have something to say about these photos, say it to me." The stepmother leaned back in the armchair, assessing the situation with calculating eyes. "Do you really want to know the truth? The whole truth?" "Yes." "Then sit down, because the story this child has started to tell is just the tip of the iceberg." She paused, as if savoring the moment. "Your father wasn't just a common crook. He was the architect of the most elaborate money-laundering scheme this region has ever seen." The apartment seemed to spin around him. "That's a lie." "Is it a lie that he stole from partners? Is it a lie that he forged documents? Is it a lie that he destroyed entire families?" The stepmother gestured towards the girl. "Ask her how many other people like her mother suffered the consequences of trying to expose the truth." The girl whispered almost inaudibly, "Many." "Your father was brilliant, I'll give him that," continued the stepmother. "He managed to transform dirty money into legitimate investments, multiply illegal capital through shell corporations, and build an impeccable reputation while burying evidence of his crimes." "Why did you marry him if you knew all this?" he asked, his voice laden with disgust. The smile she gave him was as cold as ice. "Because I wasn't just a wife, honey. I was a partner." The revelation hit him like a punch to the gut. For all these years, he had believed that his father had fallen in love with a younger woman in his later years. The reality was much more sinister. Impossible. "Who do you think helped your father identify vulnerable targets? Who provided information about businessmen in financial distress? Who suggested the ideal times to pull off scams? She stood up and walked to the window, contemplating the city. I worked at a bank before we got married. I had access to inside information about the financial situation of dozens of entrepreneurs. The girl held his small hand, and he felt how she trembled. Did she hurt my family too? The stepmother turned around, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous light. Your mother was very stubborn. Even after losing her job, she kept asking questions. Even after becoming destitute, she didn't stop looking for evidence. What did you do to her? Me? I didn't do anything directly, she returned to the armchair. But I knew people who could discourage her investigations, people who could make her life impossible without leaving a trace. He felt nauseous. You orchestrated the destruction of her life. I protected our family. I protected our businesses. I protected you. Her voice became almost maternal. Everything you have today, all this wealth, this stock portfolio, these profitable investments, it all comes from the work your father and I built together. With stolen money. With redistributed money, she corrected. We took resources from people who would waste them and turned them into something productive. We created jobs, boosted the economy, generated profits for investors. The girl got up from the sofa, walking until she was in front of the stepmother. Despite her diminutive height, there was a fierce dignity in her posture. My mother died alone, without money for medicine, because you destroyed her. My grandfather lost everything he built in a lifetime of work. How many other families did you ruin? Weak families let themselves be ruined, replied the stepmother with contempt. Strong families thrive. Like ours thrived? He asked, his voice almost a whisper. Exactly. She smiled with satisfaction. And it can continue to thrive if you're smart. What are you talking about? I'm talking about choices, honey. You can believe in the romantic fantasies of a child about justice and morality. You can try to return money that doesn't even exist anymore. You can destroy everything we've built. She made a dramatic pause. Or you can accept reality and continue to be rich. The girl squeezed his hand tighter. Don't accept it. Please. She's just a child, said the stepmother dismissively. What can she offer you? Poverty, guilt, a life of regrets? She gestured around the luxurious apartment. Or you can keep all this and build even more. At what cost? At the cost of some naive illusions about how the world really works. She leaned forward. Do you think the other millionaires in this city built their fortunes only with honesty? Do you think any great wealth exists without some skeletons in the closet? He looked at the girl, then at the stepmother, then at the apartment that represented everything he had built based on his father's legacy. For the first time in his life, his obsessive need for control clashed with a reality completely outside of his command. There's something else, the girl said suddenly, something she doesn't want you to know. The stepmother stiffened. What are you talking about? About his wife, the one who died before you came along. The stepmother's face paled visibly. This child doesn't know what she's talking about. My mother found out, continued the girl, her voice gaining strength. Found out that his wife didn't die in an accident. The world stopped. His first wife, the woman he had loved deeply, had died in a car accident 3 years ago. The pain of that loss still haunted him, still influenced his inability to completely trust anyone. Lies, he whispered. The stepmother stood up abruptly. That's enough of this. But the girl was already opening the can again, taking out an envelope he hadn't seen before. Mum got a copy of the real accident report, the one they hid from the police. Give that here, demanded the stepmother, advancing towards the child. No, he shouted, blocking her path. Let her speak. The girl opened the envelope with trembling hands, taking out papers that looked official. The car's brakes were sabotaged. Someone who knew mechanics altered the system the night before the accident. The silence that followed was deafening. He turned slowly to face the stepmother, who was completely still, like a marble statue. You killed my wife." The confession that followed didn't come in words, but in the heavy silence that the stepmother allowed to settle. Her shoulders slumped slightly, as if the weight of years of secrets was finally becoming unbearable. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost all of its previous arrogance. "She was going to find out everything," she said simply. "Your wife was too curious, too intelligent. She started asking the wrong questions about the origins of the family's money." He felt as if he were falling into an endless abyss. The woman he had loved, whom he had planned to grow old with, who had been taken from his life so brutally, had been murdered by someone he trusted. "How could you?" His voice was just a strangled whisper. "How could I protect an empire that I took years to build?" she retorted, but there was a weariness in her tone. "How could I ensure that you remained rich instead of poor and honest?" The girl approached him, her big eyes filled with a compassion that seemed impossible for someone who had suffered so much. "It's not your fault. You didn't know." But he felt guilty. For 3 years, he had mourned the loss of his wife, had isolated himself from the world, had become obsessed with control because he felt that he had lost control at that crucial moment. And all that time, the killer slept in the bed next door, participated in family decisions, had access to every aspect of his life. "Why didn't you kill me too?" he asked, genuinely curious. The stepmother smiled sadly. "Because you were perfect. Smart enough to multiply the fortune, but naive enough to never question its origins. Controlling enough to keep everything organized, but emotionally damaged enough to never get too close to the truth." Each word was a stab at his self-esteem. To realize that he had been manipulated with such precision that his own personality had been used against him, that his genuine pain over the loss of his wife had been part of her plan. "And now?" he asked, looking alternately at the stepmother and at the girl. "What happens now?" "Now you choose," said the stepmother, recovering some of her composure. "You can try to report me, but you don't have concrete evidence. You can try to return the money to the families, but most don't even exist anymore. You can try to be a hero, but you'll end up losing everything and saving no one. Or you accept that the world is complex, that money has no smell, and that you can use this fortune to do good things from now on." She leaned forward. "How many jobs does your company generate? How many families depend on your investments? Are you going to destroy all that for some adolescent idealism?" The girl tugged at his sleeve, drawing his attention. "Can I show you something?" He nodded, and she guided him to the window. Down below, in the bustling streets of the metropolis, ordinary people were going about their lives, working, shopping, living. Most probably struggled to pay the bills, to give their children an education, to maintain a decent life. "See those people?" the girl pointed. "My mother was one of them. She worked honestly, paid taxes, believed that if she did everything right, she would be rewarded. And she was punished for it," he murmured. "She was. But that doesn't mean that honesty is wrong. It means that bad people need to be stopped." She looked directly into his eyes. "You can be different." The stepmother laughed bitterly. "And how exactly would he be different? Returning money that we don't even know where it is? Looking for families that may not even exist anymore? Destroying a company that employs hundreds of people?" "There is a third option," said a voice behind them. Everyone turned to find a middle-aged man in the apartment doorway. He was tall, thin, with graying hair and tired eyes that seemed to have seen much suffering. He wore simple but clean clothes and carried a worn leather briefcase. "How did you get in here?" demanded the stepmother. "The same way I've learned to do many things over the past few years," replied the man calmly. "By having patience and waiting for the right opportunity." The girl ran towards him. "Uncle!" He picked her up in his arms with obvious affection, and suddenly the whole story rearranged itself in the millionaire's mind. "You're her mother's brother, and the son of the man in the photograph," confirmed the man, "the partner your father betrayed so many years ago. What do you want?" asked the stepmother, her voice laden with tension. Justice, but not the kind you imagine. He put the girl down and opened his briefcase, taking out a stack of documents. I've spent the last 5 years gathering evidence, locating other families who were harmed, building a solid case. To report us? To offer a solution that works for everyone. He held out the papers. These are proposals for reparations. Specific amounts for each affected family, calculated based on what they lost, plus compound interest over the years. The millionaire took the documents, his eyes scanning numbers and names. It was impressive how meticulous the work was. Each family was documented, each loss catalogued, each calculation justified. This would represent about 60% of your current net worth, continued the man. Enough to repair the damage, but not to completely destroy your life. And the rest? The rest you keep, but with conditions. Independent supervision of all your financial transactions for the next 10 years. Full transparency about the origins of any new investment. And real community work, not just donations to charity. The stepmother stood up abruptly. This is blackmail. This is justice, corrected the man. The alternative is full public exposure, criminal lawsuits against everyone involved, and imprisonment for those directly responsible. You don't have enough evidence. I have these. He pointed to the girl's can. I have testimonies from 7 families. I have bank documents that an anonymous source recently provided to me. His eyes met the stepmother's. And I have the confession you just made in front of a child who can testify. The silence settled again, but this time it was different. It was the silence of people processing options, evaluating consequences, making decisions that would change the rest of their lives. If I accept, said the millionaire slowly, what happens to her? He pointed at the stepmother. She forfeits any claim to the inheritance, any position in the company, any access to the family assets. But she won't go to prison as long as she cooperates with the reparations process. The stepmother looked around the luxurious apartment, then at the man she had manipulated for years, finally at the girl who had triggered this entire revelation. And if I don't cooperate? Then you face the full legal consequences of your actions, including what happened to his first wife. She closed her eyes, defeated. I accept. The millionaire knelt down in front of the girl, getting to her level. And you? What do you want to happen to you? I want to have a real family, she said simply. I want to go to school. I want to draw birds on real paper, not on the wall. You can stay with me, offered the uncle. I've always wanted to take care of you, but I needed to resolve this situation first. And I, said the millionaire, surprised by his own words, would like to help, not just with money, but as a friend, as someone who has learned a lot from you. 6 months later, the luxurious apartment had been sold. He now lived in a smaller but still comfortable house in the suburbs of the city. His company had been restructured with independent oversight. His investments were completely transparent, and he dedicated 3 days a week to working directly with families in vulnerable situations. The girl was enrolled in an excellent school, lived with her uncle in a welcoming home, and visited her new friend every weekend. Her drawings of birds now decorated the walls of the classroom, and she had discovered a special talent for mathematics. The stepmother had disappeared from the city, but not before signing all the necessary documents for the reparation of the families. He never heard from her again, and found that he didn't miss her. His fortune had diminished significantly, but for the first time in years, he slept well at night. Every dollar he earned now had a clean origin. Every investment was made with transparency. Every business decision considered its impact on the people involved. And when he looked out the window of his new house, seeing the girl play in the yard with other neighborhood children, he knew he had made the right choice. He had discovered that true wealth was not measured in money or assets, but in the ability to sleep peacefully, knowing that his actions made the world a better place. The faded photograph that had started it all was now framed on his desk, not as a reminder of shame, but as a reminder that it's never too late to choose to do the right thing, even when it costs everything we thought we valued.